On behalf of my colleague, Dr. Matt Spangler from the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, and me, welcome to this module entitled Genetic Risk Management. I'm Bob Weaber, and I'm a professor at Kansas State University. I hold a PhD in animal breeding and genetics from Cornell University, and I have more than 20 years experience in beef cattle genetic evaluation systems, including work as a technical staff member at 2 breed associations and as an academic. I'll be your host for today's module. An overview of today's discussion on genetic risk management includes a review of the concept of EPD accuracy, including sources of information that contribute to accuracy formation, as well as the benefits of increased accuracy. We'll also cover the concept of possible change and confidence intervals and their utilization in genetic risk management. We'll also talk about percentile rank tables as a way to understand the genetic merit of an individual animal relative to his peers. And we'll also talk about cohort selection as a method to control risk. First, we'll start with the concept of accuracy, or EPD accuracy. The accuracy of an EPD is simply a measure of its reliability. EPD accuracies are reflective of how much data was included in the calculation or the computation of the expected progeny difference. For example, an animal that only has a limited amount of information that comes from, say, its pedigree or the average of the EPDs of its parents, so no performance records or genomic data included in the individual animal's analysis, or progeny data, gets what we call a pedigree estimate. Again, just the average of the sire and dam's EPDs. What's the average genetic merit of that particular mating? Those EPDs are assigned an accuracy of 0.05, so at the low end of the scale. Remember, accuracies range from 0 to 1. So as we add information to the genetic evaluation for individual animals and groups of animals, accuracy increases. So for an animal that has its own performance record evaluated in a valid contemporary group, where there's been head-to-head competition and their own pedigree information included, will typically have accuracy of around 0.3. That would be for a trait like weaning weight or yearling weight. As an animal amasses a large number of progeny or grand progeny data, the accuracy continues to approach 1. So an animal with, say, several thousand progeny across hundreds of contemporary groups may have an accuracy of 0.9. What's important to recognize in terms of the relationship of accuracy is that as prediction error variance or uncertainty around an animal's EPD goes to 0, the accuracy of that animal's EPD goes to 1. So there's an inverse relationship between the error variance associated with an EPD and the accuracy value. Much of the world reports accuracy using the traditional form, which is often just abbreviated as R, but R sub TI. And that form of accuracy is the traditional one. That's the theoretical correlation between a true breeding value and that's unobserved and an index or prediction of that breeding value. And that form of accuracy is used by much of the world outside of North America. But here in the United States and in some cases in Canada, accuracy is reported on what's called the BIF accuracy scale, and it's a transformation of traditional accuracy such that changes in accuracy form linear changes in possible change values. We'll talk about possible change later, and this relationship will become less opaque. For more information on BIF accuracy, you can visit the Beef Improvement Federation guidelines at the web link below. We'll talk more about possible change in just a moment. This table presents relationships between accuracy in the classical form as R, or BIF accuracy, and its connection to heritability. So this is a table of the approximate number of progeny needed to reach various accuracy levels under the R or BIF standard scales. 3 different heritability levels are reported. And remember, heritability is just a measure of the proportion of variation of an individual animal's phenotype that's under control by genetics. So animals with traits with low heritability require more data or more progeny records to increase to the same level of accuracy as compared to those with high levels of accuracy, or high levels of heritability rather. In this table, we'll start with an accuracy on the R scale of 0.1. That's equivalent to a BIF accuracy of 0.01, so a low accuracy. And it takes roughly one progeny across all three of these heritability scales to achieve that level of accuracy. But you'll notice as we approach a relatively high accuracy of 0.6 on the R scale, that only produces a BIF accuracy of about 0.2. So for traits with low heritability, it requires about 22 progeny records in a valid contemporary group that includes progeny of multiple sires under the same production environment to achieve that level of accuracy. With modest levels of heritability, it's 7 progeny records, and with relatively high levels of heritability, only 4 records. You'll see as we approach EPD accuracy on the BIF scale of the mid 0.5s or 0.56 here, that produces accuracy on the R scale of 0.9, so very high on the R scale. It takes about 167 progeny for a trait with a heritability of 0.1, for an heritability of 0.3, about 53 progeny, or for a highly heritable trait with heritabilities of 0.5, about 30 records. And notice here that as we approach the very end of the scale, it takes thousands of records to achieve high levels of accuracy. This picture demonstrates the relationship in a pictorial way between accuracy on the R scale and accuracy on the BIF scale. You'll notice that as R accuracy increases at a linear rate, BIF accuracy increases at a curvilinear rate or a quadratic rate. And that's due to this scaling effect between R accuracy and BIF accuracy. So what do differing accuracies look like and mean practically? Well, here's 2 bulls that both have the same EPD. Let's say it's weaning weight, and they have an EPD of 40. There's a bull in blue and a bull in red. These bulls have differing accuracy levels. The one in red represents an accuracy typical of what we might see in a yearling bull that's offered for sale here in the United States for use in natural service. He has an accuracy of 0.3. That's typically associated with an animal's pedigree and own performance record being included in the genetic evaluation in a proper contemporary group. The bull in blue has an accuracy of 0.8, and you'll notice that that distribution is much narrower. Here the distribution represents the standard errors of prediction, or how precise we are or how confident we are in our estimate of the mean or the EPD here at 40. You can see that we're much more confident, i.e. the confidence interval of the range that the true value exists is much narrower for the bull in blue than it is for the bull in red. To quantify those, the standard error prediction is 11.4 for an accuracy of 0.3. This is from some data from the American Simmental Association. And for an accuracy of 0.8, that standard error prediction is about 3.3, so much narrower. So where do we get information, and how does information accumulate to increase accuracy? Well, if we think about an animal's productive life, we gather pieces of information over time to build out or increase the accuracy of that animal's EPD prediction. And those various pieces of information contribute differentially to that increase in accuracy. So here we've got that progression or that life scale, or lifetime scale rather, for an individual animal. And let's start at the left. So we know that the pedigree estimate, or the average of the sire and dam's EPD that represents what we expect the average performance or average genetic merit of progeny from that mating to be, produces an accuracy on the BIF scale of somewhere around 0.05. If we add that animal's own performance record for a trait like weaning weight, we typically observe an increase in accuracy to somewhere between 0.2 and 0.3, depending on the genetic evaluation, the magnitude or the size of the contemporary group, and other information in the genetic evaluation, including genetic parameters. As we add additional information, genomic data is a popular way to increase accuracy. In this case, the genomic data represented here also produces an accuracy somewhere of around 0.2 to 0.3 for a trait like weaning weight. This increase in accuracy is independent of the animal's own performance. It's strictly the animal's pedigree estimate plus the genomic data. So those two are roughly equivalent, an animal's own performance record and the genomic data. Note the next column references the animal's own performance record, performance data, or animal's phenotype, if you will, plus the genomic information from that animal. It produces an accuracy that's somewhat higher, but not a doubling of the accuracy as one might expect. And it's because of the part-whole relationship between the information contained in an animal's own performance record and the genomic information that's also submitted. Those aren't two independent sets of information, and as such, we don't get a large, substantial increase in accuracy that's separate from those two sources of information. The next column here represents the addition of a few progeny. Again, expected progeny differences goal is to help produce data or information that's useful in making selection decisions that speak to the differences we expect in progeny groups, or progeny averages. So obviously reporting some progeny records adds a lot of accuracy to our predictions. Here in this case, we see an accuracy for the few progeny approach 0.5. If we had lots and lots of progeny or grand progeny records from a particular sire in valid contemporary groups, we can approach accuracies of 0.8 to 0.9 fairly easily. So you might ask, well, what are the benefits of increased accuracy? Well, one of the ways we think about that is through, as animal breeders, through an equation called the breeder's equation. And the increased accuracy benefits us in a number of ways. One, it helps us mitigate risk, but it also enables us to make more rapid genetic progress. So here in the breeder's equation, starting at the left side, the change in breeding value per unit time, or how much genetic progress we make over time, is a function of the accuracy of the tool that we're using for selection, in this case of breeding values, the intensity of selection, so that's represented here by the character I, and the amount of genetic variation or the standard deviation for the trait, and how much genetic opportunity there is, or how much spread in terms of genetics there is in the population. In the denominator of this equation is the letter L, which is representative of the generation interval, or the length of time between parents and progeny, the average age of parents and their progeny. In this case, several of these things are difficult to control. For instance, the standard deviation of the breeding values or the genetic merit of the population is difficult for us to change individually. Selection intensity, though, is something we can control by being more or less choosy in our selection of animals, how elite we require them to be to enter our herd. The other thing that we can influence is the accuracy, or represented here by the letter R with subscripts BV, EBV. And again, that's the correlation between the true breeding value and the expected breeding values. Obviously, reporting data or genomic information increases the accuracy. And as such, the tool we use in selection is more precise, and therefore we get more response to our selection effort. So the change in breeding value per unit time increases. It's important to note here, though, that increased accuracy does not mean higher or lower EPDs. EPD accuracy is simply a measure of the amount of information used to calculate the EPD, and adding information to our genetic prediction system can result in EPDs going up or down. Those are independent of the amount of accuracy, but certainly increasing accuracy means our predictions are more accurate or more reliable. Next, let's talk about possible change in confidence intervals. So one useful way to conceptualize and utilize, in fact, EPD accuracies is to make a connection between the EPD accuracy and the confidence interval around an individual bull's EPD or female's EPD to give us an idea of risk. What happens if the EPD isn't exactly what we think it is? given the data that we have at hand. So possible change is simply the standard error of prediction, or it's the square root of prediction error variance. To many of you non-animal breeders, that doesn't mean a lot, but possible change reflects how much an EPD can change, going from the current level of information to complete information. So the idea here is that we get an idea of how precise our estimate of this mean is, or the EPD, much like we do in other statistical processes. And it enables us, via accuracy, to build an interval around an EPD to speak to what confidence do we have about the animal's true breeding value existing in a certain range, centered upon that animal's EPD. So it's estimated that 68% of the time, an EPD won't move outside a window of one possible change, plus or minus, from the animal's EPD, going from the current level of information to complete information. So if we went from, say, a 0.6 accuracy to an accuracy of 1, how precise did we do? 95% confidence intervals for EPDs are calculated by taking the animal's EPD and adding and subtracting 1.96 times those standard errors of prediction. It provides a wider interval, so we have more confidence that the animal's true progeny difference, or EPD, lives in that interval. A picture probably will help us understand this concept more thoroughly, and we'll show that in just a moment. Here's a table, though, of possible changes. This is produced by the American Simmental Association. Many other breeds produce similar tables to relate the connection between accuracy level and standard error prediction or possible change. Standard error prediction and possible change are ultimately the same values, or the same thing, just different names. So we can see here, as we increase in accuracy, or we go from the top of the table towards the bottom of the table in any individual trait, we see that the possible change, or the standard error predictions, decrease. And you'll notice as we go from a 0.1 to a 0.2 accuracy, we'll use calving ease here as our example, we decrease the possible change, or the standard error prediction, by 0.8. You'll also notice we go from a 0.6 to a 0.7 accuracy, we also decrease that standard error prediction by the same amount, 0.7, or 0.8 rather. This is the linear relationship between BIF accuracy and possible change. That transformation that we discussed earlier enables these possible change values to be linear in terms of change with accuracy. So possible change values in action. A 68% confidence interval, so roughly 2/3 of the time. If we're interested in understanding the range in which an animal's true progeny difference lives, we can use this 68% confidence interval, or the EPD plus or minus 1 possible change or standard error prediction value. For an animal with a weaning weight EPD of 40 then, and an accuracy of 0.6, we can look up in the previous table that the possible change value is 4.6. So we can use that information to calculate a 68% confidence interval around the animal's EPD by taking the EPD of 40 and adding or subtracting 4.6 from that value to produce a confidence range, or confidence interval, of 35.4 to 44.6. So with roughly 2/3 confidence, we're positive that that bull's genetic value, or progeny difference, lives in this interval. You'll note that if we want to be more confident in our range and predictions, we can increase that by using, instead of one possible change value, 1.96. The possible change interval is calculated the same way, so it's 40 plus or minus 1.96 times the possible change value of 4.6 to yield an interval of 31 to 49. So we're 95% confident that this bull's true progeny difference lies within this interval. Here's a picture, and this may help us understand possible change and confidence intervals more thoroughly. Here's a bull, again, that has an EPD of 40. And if we think about the distribution of that animal's EPDs and the standard errors associated with that prediction, we can produce this plot, or this bell-shaped curve. In here, you'll notice the dotted lines that drop from the solid red lines at periodic intervals represent the width of that possible change or confidence interval, or possible change value. And this standard error prediction or possible change is 4.6. Okay, so in that interval from roughly 36 to 44, we have roughly 68% confidence that that bull's true progeny difference lies somewhere in that interval. Or if we go from about 32 to 48, we find a 95% confidence that the animal's true progeny difference lies within that interval. You can see, though, as we increase accuracy, our confidence intervals get narrower. As we have more information, the predictions are more reliable. Percentile rank is also a useful tool to understand genetic risk. In particular, it helps us quantify and understand how different an animal might be from his peers that are available for selection. It simply locates a bull's EPD relative to other bulls in the breed. This process is particularly useful if you're unfamiliar with the distribution of EPDs in a particular breed. So, for example, if an EPD ranks at the 25th percentile in the table, that means that 24 out of 100 bulls on average are better than this particular bull. And if we selected them at random, 75 out of the 100 would be worse. Okay, so it's an easy way to evaluate where a bull ranks within the breed. Again, remember, expected progeny differences, or EPDs, are relative ranking of animals in the population. And so the possible change values the percentile rank tables let you determine how extreme an animal might be and where he ranks within the breed. It's a measure of extremeness. It's important to recognize that percentile rank tables change periodically with the production of EPDs from various national cattle evaluation systems. And it's important when you're making selection decisions to go and download the current percentile rank table to make sure you have the most current and accurate information to make your comparisons. Those percentile rank tables are available from various breed association websites. So if you're looking for an Angus bull's percentile rank table, go to the Angus website. If you're looking for one for Hereford, go to Hereford. Simmental from the Simmental website, and so forth. Here's an example of a percentile rank table from an evaluation produced by the American Angus Association in 2017. Here is the percentiles on the left side that go from the top, and then remember these are the upper percentiles, so they rank animals in the top percentage of the population. And so we start with the top 1%, 2%, and so on. So if we had a bull that had an EPD of 80, he would have a weaning weight EPD that ranked in roughly the top 98% of the breed, or the top 2%. If we had a bull that has a yearling weight EPD of 100, he ranks in the top 40% of the breed. So again, percentile ranks just help us position the animal relative to his peers in the population. Another useful way to control genetic risk is think about cohort selection. We know in many cases producers, either seed stock or commercial, will buy a number of bulls at one time to turn out and mate in a natural service breeding environment, whereas a number of bulls are turned out with a group of cows. In this case, we should think about, well, what is the target EPD and how do we improve the accuracy or decrease risk associated with that selection? One of the things that we know is that animals, some of them will improve in terms of their EPD and some will decline based on progeny data submitted. But if we turn out a cohort of bulls, we have a tendency to have better reliability and better prediction. We get the response that we anticipated. And it's due to this idea that the standard error of that mean of the EPDs that we turned out decreases as the number of animals in the group increases. Okay, so if we turn out 10 bulls, we're more likely to get the EPD response that we selected for than if we just turn out 1 or 2. And that's because if we just turn out 1 or 2 bulls, if both of them happen to decrease in terms of their EPD as we accumulate more information, our performance level and genetic merit goes down. The more animals we have, the odds of them both moving in the same direction is decreased. so the reliability of that decision is improved. In summary, EPD accuracy provides a useful metric and is reflective of the amount of information available for the computation of an EPD. Accuracies range from 0 to 1, with 1 being the most information and the most reliable, and 0 being the least. Increased accuracy represents less selection risk. So if we're considering two bulls, say in an artificial insemination semen catalog, and the bulls both have comparable EPDs but have substantially different accuracies, we should likely select the bull that has a higher EPD accuracy, as it represents less selection risk. Possible change values help us quantify potential change in EPDs for varying levels of EPD accuracy. They help us build confidence intervals around those particular EPDs to understand how much risk we face if the EPDs in fact do move around some, as more information becomes available for the genetic evaluation. Lastly here, percentile rank tables help us understand an animal's position in the population of animals that are available or under selection. It helps us scale and understand, is this animal an elite animal in the population or a very inferior one, or is he close to the average? Lastly here, the selection of cohorts of animals for our target level of genetic potential also helps reduce risk by decreasing the opportunity of change in the mean value of the EPDs of the bulls turned out. For continued learning, I encourage you to complete Module 7, which is the next one in this series, and begins a discussion on genomics basics. Related concepts to this module include understanding EPDs, available in Module number 2, discussions about genetic evaluation systems and their construction in Module number 3, genomics basics in Module number 7, and genomic-enabled genetic evaluations in Module 9. More information on the U.S. Livestock Genetics Export Group is available at www.uslge.org. Thank you,